You guys are in for a real treat because today is a new adventure as we embark on our very first roundtable event.
Uncertainty is exhilarating. Like, we've got a way in which we can help our people see uncertainty. It's the framing of it. Framing makes a picture look absolutely fantastic or distinctly average.
Mindset is everything and opportunities are everywhere. For those in a leadership position, for those who have that influence, it's not what we say, it's what we do. It's the behaviours that shape the culture within our team.
Resistance to change is healthy also. It is challenging the change. That's how we come up with best options, which then usually gives us more choices.
Let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's ask questions. Let's be inquisitive. Let's be a bit resistant so we can ask the questions that need asking to make sure we get this right. Hey, welcome to the Leaders Podcast with me, Laura MacDonald, the leadership coach and mentor. Come with me as I explore the elements of leadership that give leaders like you the power and confidence to make the impact you know you can. I'll be sharing my own experiences, top tips and insights, and talking to some very special guests to share their thoughts and leadership experiences on mindset, influence, change and growth. So let's get right to it. You guys are in for a real treat because today is a new adventure as we embark on our very first roundtable event. I'm extremely excited to welcome newcomer Povey, an influential leader with a unique multi-sector viewpoint on creating innovative and sustainable change and owner of DPC Limited. Returning guest Zoe Thompson, founder of Phoenix Coaching Limited, coaching leaders and empowering public sector professionals to transition into thriving business ownership. And another newcomer and just a little bit of a legend, Tony Smith, former GB Rugby League coach turned mentor and coach for leaders, teams and culture development. Welcome to the Leaders Podcast, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the kind introduction as well.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's great to have you all on. I'm very, very excited. Zoe will already know this, but we have a little bit of a tradition on this podcast. So I ask all of my guests a question that helps the leaders listening gain ideas on how they can serve others better by serving themselves too. So we'll start with Drew, if that's okay. So what have you done to serve yourself in the last 24 hours?
Oh, well, I would probably start with my ice bath, which is hideous, Laura, absolute abject misery, but it's good for me and it seems to calm my mind, and trained as well this morning, which is, I try and do every morning as well. So those two things are those kind of rituals I try and have every day that I think start the day with a couple of wins for me, but get my mind working and get me straight to.
Definitely. I've never done an ice bath. I'm not
Don't do
brave
it.
enough.
Misery. It's misery. It is good for you, but it is misery.
Maybe not, but good for you to have that routine in place every day if it kicks you into gear. So yeah, Zoe, you gave a really interesting answer last time, but I appreciate you can't go out for dinner with strangers every day. So, what have you done?
I suddenly panicked then. I was thinking, what did I answer last time? And I remember, yes, we had a whole conversation about it. That was great. So last 24 hours. So I logged off on time yesterday. When I said I was going to log off, I actually logged off. I settled down with a book last night. So I've got a new David Baldacci book on the go, and I have also been to the gym this morning, so that's a similar routine for me. Although I will never fight you for the ice bath. So you can keep that one. But gym, yes. Ice bath, no. And I'm not a 5 a.m. either. I go at 10 when I've got up, having a coffee, and I'm awake.
That sounds a bit more my speed. Definitely. And Tony, how about you? How have you served yourself in the last 24 hours?
I've been listening to a book a second time, just to refresh. It's not that long ago that I listened to it. I'm a listener to books, but the Resilience Project is, I've recommended it to a lot of people, but a few people recently, and while I was recommending it to them, it sort of instigated me to go and revise it myself. And it's probably a book that I recommend to every human being. You know, it's just one of those. It's not about necessarily leadership, but there's a lot of leadership messages in it. But it's mostly about gratitude of what we've got, you know, in our lives, no matter how big or little those things are, and to appreciate what you got, not what you're looking for. So, yeah, that's probably how I've been treating myself best in the last 24 hours. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. I shall add that one to my list. I haven't read that one yet. Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of those ideas, guys. That was brilliant. So we're here to discuss the psychology of resistance, why leaders struggle to change, and hopefully provide some tips and insights for those listening right now. I'm quite curious because we have a wide range of sector experiences here, from education to sports to police service to hospitality, from private to public sector, from corporate experience to small business ownership. So I'm interested to hear the areas that you've all most commonly seen leaders resist change, and I'm wondering if there are crossovers or if different industries and sectors promote different types of change resistance. So, for instance, in leadership in hospitality, it was sometimes a real challenge to get leaders to flex to different styles instead of sticking rigidly all throughout the day to the command and control style. That approach is great for service, but when you're not in the middle of lunch service, things need to change a little bit. It can move to different styles, and some leaders I work with really, really struggled to see that situational approach to leadership because of the sheer force of the command and control style in that industry.
Well, I'm going to challenge it. I believe that most people actually like change. As long as they know what the benefits of the change are. And I suppose resistance to change is not really understanding the need for it. And, you know, that's why also challenging change is also something that I think is fantastic too. You know, what people, when they challenge or are resistant to change, they're actually saying, why? What's in it for me? What's in it for the people that I'm leading? You know, you need to explain. Now, some people don't get exposed to different ways, and so they get used to leading in their way. But as soon as they're opened up to why there's benefits in doing it a different way, I think people actually really like it and are seeking information as to why they should change. I know there's some stubbornness in particularly some of us older style people, and once we get some age and we think we've got a method that suits us, and then therefore don't look for ways to improve. And I think that's dangerous, you know, and it's certainly not part of what I'm about. As I've got older, I've embraced more and more change, I think, but want to challenge it at the same time. So I don't think resistance to change is a bad thing, as long as they're prepared to embrace the answers. I don't think overall people are resistant to change. Otherwise, we'd still be riding around in horse and carts. You know, we're changing very rapidly in this day and age. So, you know, I mean, I'm even referring to learning. There's so many books on leadership and podcasts on leadership. Nobody would be listening or reading any of those if they didn't want to change. They wouldn't be popular. So I'm challenging that people don't or are resistant to it. I feel it's almost quite the opposite nowadays. We're actually embracing better ways to do things more now than I think we did in the past.
Yeah, I think that, you know, in answer to your original question, I think it depends on the person. And I think that question you asked at the beginning of the whole podcast about what are we doing to kind of serve ourselves and look after ourselves, I think it depends on where the individual person is, because think too often we can go, oh, that person will struggle with that change, and we start to predict it. We'll use change models like the 20-60-20, 20 you're going to love it, 20 you're going to hate it, 60 you're going to be kind of the ambivalent lot in the middle. But I think it depends what people have got going on in their lives. So I'm always cautious across different sectors, because I work in all those sectors you mentioned earlier, rather than say, well, they struggle with that. I think that's too broad a brush to use. But I think if there is some resistance there, I think the best thing to do is to dig into it and find out why, like what is going on, for that person, for why they might start to get to a point of resistance. We know the human brain is wired to protect us, to make sure we survive. So anything that thinks it might be outside of that, what we know, and that locus of control and the survival, I think we can get a little bit worried about. So I think understanding that is a part of the human condition that we will all have to a certain extent. And I think the other side of that is understanding that kind of status quo bias that Tony mentioned a minute ago. We like the way we do things. There's a joke in our house about shaving foam gate, whereas I'm pretty relaxed about most things with my 3 lads. But if you move the shaving foam out of the bathroom, someone's going to dive, right? It kind of gets to that point where it just gets ridiculous, because we like things to be done a certain way. I do my training in the 5 o'clock, Zoe, and I like that. And then the training, and then the ice bath, and then the learning, like Tony was saying there. And if someone messes with that system, it's not good for my mental feng shui. But what I do think is, if we understand it, I think that's important. But I think Tony raises a really good point. And it's a point I made. I was speaking at a conference. It was the International Marketing Society conference. And we were talking about change and change makers on that day. And I said, look, change fatigue. And everyone was like nodding. And yeah, I think we talk a lot about, but I said, but what about change imperative? Picking up Toby's point, like, if we don't change, what's going to happen? Leaders on stages or in sessions all over the country, all over the world, will be using Einstein's definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different result. If you always do what you've always done, you always do, you'll get what you've always got. And I think that dynamic is one that Tony's talking about there for me. Like, we all want to get better, we all want to move, we all want to grow, we want to earn more, we want to get a better position, and understanding that all progress will require the change in some way. Also being careful that the subtext of that is not all change leads to progress. So kind of understanding those two dynamics. But I think Tony makes some really good points. How much resistance is there? But when there is some, for me, understand it, talk about it, and move on from it. Because when people see the pragmatics of what else could we do, where could we go, what could this be, then I think the excitement level comes. And as we know, the emotion of excitement is exactly the same as the emotion for being nervous or concerned. It's the same thing. Like most things, maybe rather than resistance, we should reframe it and talk about something slightly different, would be my answer to that.
And I like what you said about the small things, about the little routines that we have. That was quite often some of the biggest sort of pushbacks that I had from staff in general, was if I did something really simple, like move the raw meat in the kitchen from one fridge to another, everybody'd be like, whoa, hang on, that's not where we find the raw meat. They're just like, yeah, it would take me weeks to get them to understand that's where it needed to be, because that was just the familiarity of it all. They really didn't like that.
Oh, I think what you've just shared there reminded me of the book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Yes.
Great change book. So slightly different cheese rather than meat, but same challenge. I think both points raised are really, I would completely agree with Tony in challenging that we don't like change. I think we don't like the transition of change. That's the bit we don't like. I think, as Tony was saying, if we're sold to the benefits of the change, then we are excited about what's to come. I think, certainly from my experience, sometimes it's a fear of losing what's really important through that change. And so they are, certainly in a lot of the conversations I had, they want the change. They also don't want to lose certain things in the process. And so understanding what is most important to people to hold on to and what they're willing to let go of in that transition period can really help. And as Tony said, selling the benefits and helping them to understand it. And I think also feeding into what Drew was saying, as humans, that the human psychology, we like certainty. So we like to know what's coming. Change always has a lot of unknowns. So listening and acknowledging the concerns about all of the things that we don't know. And certainly for me, when I was in the business change manager role, was communicating, there's no update. Keeping the communication lines open, because the uncertainty was what caused a lot of the fear. Because when we don't give people information, they try and fill the gaps with their own ideas. So I think a lot of it is the transition that is what is uncomfortable for people. It's outside of the comfort zone, it's unfamiliar. So the more we talk about the benefits and the more we give them that sense of purpose as to why we're going through this challenging period, because this is what's on the other side, then we can shift their nervousness to excitement, which is what Drew was also talking about. I think, yeah, it's a great challenge from Tony. And I think it would be very easy for us to sit here and say, actually, yes, and kind of not have this conversation, whereas actually we do need to change. And I do think there's some generational differences in that as well. So baby boomer generation, my generation of Generation X, certainly the baby boomer generation had a lot less frequency of change. They still had change, but it was less frequent. And as each generation has gone on, changes have become more and more frequent. And now the generation that are coming into the workplace now, they haven't had what we would call that stability without change. Everything is changing all of the time. So in terms of their resistance and acceptance to change, that's their norm. They're used to technology changing every 5 minutes. They're used to globally things happening every 5 minutes, it feels. That's their norm. Whereas I think for some of us in the older generations, we had time to settle in, get used to it. Google happened, email happened, but we had a good year to kind of get used to one thing before the next thing came out. So I think there's different challenges for different people. It's all about the individual. And that's the challenge for leaders, is to listen to the individual and then communicate, make sure that they are communicating the benefits, they understand what's in it for me, but also listening to what the concerns are, what they want to protect, because we might be able to build that into the new normal, but also what they're actually really looking forward to letting go of. And there's always that opportunity and change to perhaps shed other layers of skin with that as well. So yeah, it's a good challenge.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a millennial myself. So we started off very steadily and it was all very consistent. And then this boom of social media and things like that came in when I was about my mid to late teens. And all of a sudden, the world started changing at 100 miles an hour. And that, I think, was okay for a few years. And then suddenly it got a bit fast paced. And a lot of people in my generation, I certainly saw start to struggle with change, because they were like, well, hang on a minute, we've started our lives quite consistently. And then it's almost like we're just kind of expected to go more and more on the hamster wheel. And that can lead to this sort of change fatigue. And all
it was exciting initially, wasn't it? Because it was an add-on. It was something that we did as extra. So you could opt in or you could opt out. And as time went on, it became more integrated into day-to-day life and into the workplace. So you couldn't just log on to Facebook if you wanted to be a part of that world. Suddenly that world came into the working world as well. And it wasn't an option anymore. Suddenly it was, this is it. You got to get on board with this.
Absolutely. And I actually talked about a much more recent change. Obviously, AI has now suddenly become a big part of everybody's lives over the last couple of years. I talked about this with a previous guest, Tania Gonzo. She came on to speak about AI in general. And I sort of said, well, yeah, it's not something we're really being given much of an option about. I did an update on my phone and it updated Samsung's version of AI straight onto my phone. It didn't ask me whether I wanted it. It was just like, here you go. Change is forced upon us quite regularly now, which I think can be difficult for some and easier for others. But a lot of it can come from what generation you come from, what industry you've been working in, like how you were trained, who your mentors were around change. All of that sort of thing. It can come from lots.
I would say, Laura, though, even with the generational stuff, which I completely agree with, and I think Gen Z can get a good kick in sometimes. A great guy I know called Alex Alverson wrote a book called The Snowflake Myth, where everybody has a go at them. What they are really good at is adapting and shifting. They'll have a job every 2 years. So we can't quite say that there's everything bad about them. But I also think we do forget the resilience of humans. And the best example I saw of this was during COVID, right? Everyone was kind of, when it first happened, everyone was like going, you want me to work from home? Like, I can't, you what? You want me to do my job at home? And we're like, well, yeah. And no, I can't do it. I can't do it. And everyone was kind of up in arms. 6 months later, we were like, right, we're all going back to the office. Feel like, well, you want me back in the office? You having a laugh? Like, I'm quite happy working at home. Thank you very much. And it was kind of this, like, every time I talk about changing people, I'm like, don't forget how good we are at it. Because Tony's dead right? We'd be in horse and carts still now. And we'd have a completely different world in manufacturing, hospitality, police. And the world will be completely different. The big hope I've got, and I think hope is the great activator, is we're really bloody good at it. So actually, I think talking to people about that, don't ever underestimate the power of humans, is pretty much what I say in every session I ever do. And I also say, there's a lot of hope there. Whatever you're going to go through, we'll find a way. That's why we've existed for as long as we have, the ones that fit best. That's what we are. And we have a good way of bobbing and weaving, adapting. We'll handle AI like we've handled everything else, like we've handled social media. And of course, you don't have to play with those things if you don't want to. You don't have to be part of that, which I think there's quite a few people now who are going, I don't want to opt into that, thank you very much. And actually, I don't really need it in my life. But I do think that that's one bit to really hold on to. We're bloody good at this. So we'll be all right.
There's choices. There are choices with it. And I think totally agree. And I love this discussion, by the way. And Zoe, you mentioned about the Facebook and not having a choice. And that's how it seems. For instance, I don't. I've never had Facebook. I've never had Instagram. I have converted onto LinkedIn for business purposes, and that's it. And I'm still so naive about the power of some of. I kind of get it. I kind of get what it's about, but I've still got a choice. I've still got that choice to go along with some of that change, and that's great to have. It's when we don't have choices sometimes, I think that's when we get a bit more resistant to change and not want to move. When you're forced to do it and you don't want to, or told to do it and you don't care about the benefits, that's when you are resistant to change. But I'm also going to refer back to what I said earlier. I think resistance to change is healthy also. It is challenging the change. That's how we come up with best options, which then usually gives us more choices. And we do like choices most of the time. Occasionally we do like to be told, just do this anyway. We've all got a little bit of that in our DNA, and we need to be led sometimes or directed sometimes. But most of us nowadays, and no matter what the age, don't like to be forced into something. We like to have the option to do it if we want to. So getting that balance right and getting the message across so most of the people opt into the change is the optimal. But there's certain things we've got to just adhere to as well. That's forming communities. I may not necessarily agree with or want the benefits myself, but if the majority get the benefit of that change, well, I need to adhere to that as also. That's what we call community, in culture. So yeah, it's fascinating, all the different facets of it, but opposing it isn't necessarily bad either. That's how we come up with best answers.
And if I can add to that, so talking about the opt-in, opt-out technology in general is for, I think, workplaces is generally now an opt-in. So I started working for the police the year before Google came in. So this was back in the days where you had to go and just ask everybody for the answer. You couldn't just Google it, or you had to look through 20 odd almanacs to try and find the right law and the right legislation to answer the public's question. Well, I then, 15 years later, was the business change manager when we rolled out laptops, mobile devices and body-worn cameras. 15 years is not a huge amount of time in terms of the technology going from everything was on paper to everything was computerized, and then we're putting the technology on officers, on staff, going out to the public. One of the things we did, picking up on the people that were less for the change, was we invited the people who were most cynical, most critical. We invited them in and we gave them that space to talk through, because I think often people need to feel heard. So if they feel heard the first time, that's it. They feel heard. They don't need to repeat it. Whereas when they don't feel heard, they just get louder and louder. And that can be quite damaging in terms of the bigger picture of the change. So we brought them together. We brought in the people who were most cynical and critical, and we brought in the people who were wanting to be early adopters. So as soon as you announce any new technology, there's always people that are like, pick me, I want it first. Yeah. So we put them all together, and we were able to have those conversations where people were able to voice their concerns and what they were most worried about, as well as the people who were most excited about it. And they always did the selling for us. You know, they talked about the benefits and, well, this is how we can use it, and this is why it'd be really beneficial. But also it helped to balance it out. So we didn't just rush into everything. It gave us that opportunity to think, actually, that's a really good point. We need to really think about that and make sure there's a process in place, or we have that sorted. So I think it's always good to hear both sides of it. But I think it can be very easy to not hear the cynical and critical because it's an uncomfortable conversation, whereas actually there's a lot of data in that if we can get past the emotion that comes with it, or the tone that often comes in and the sarcasm that comes with it, if we can get past that and we can hear what it is they're trying to tell us and let them feel heard and do something with that, it can make a huge difference. Like it's important. We don't want to rush ahead without thinking through all of the things that we haven't yet thought of from the people that are going to be using or being involved in that change.
I saw change happen from two very different ends of the scale as well. Like in hospitality, in the particular company I worked in, the computer system we were using for the first few years I was with them was, you know, the old sort of 1980s thing, the blue background with the block letters and all this sort of stuff. Everybody was screaming, like tearing their hair out about this thing every day. And we've been screaming for change for so long that when it finally came in 2010, everybody just went, yes, finally, it's here. But when I moved into further education, we had a major change in apprenticeships I think we started it 2016, and we spent about just over a year and a half prepping for it. And I believe that we were the first company in the industry to make the changes that needed to be made, and everybody was going to have to do it, but everybody was kind of looking at us. So the whole company was the first to do it, but everybody was sat there going, oh God, you know, we have to get this right. But because they knew how critical it was, everybody was willing to spend that time, and they did things like get advocates for that change, and they brought people in to have that thorough, deep understanding so that they could sell it to everybody else and spend a year and a half selling it before it actually came into effect. So it was nice to be on that end as well, where actually you were at the forefront of change rather than sitting behind and waiting for something to come in that should have been done a long time ago. So change can happen from lots of different perspectives, but I think it's just that critical, how do we get through to everybody that why behind everything, and really going, actually, yeah, there is a reason for this. We're not just doing it for the sake of change. We're making sure this is purposeful. We're making sure that this is going to add value to us, to everybody we serve. And actually, I'm going to be, as a leader, the first one or one of the first people to say, let's go for it. Let's do it. Let's ask questions. Let's be inquisitive. Let's be a bit resistant so we can ask the questions that need asking to make sure we get this right as well and get everyone on board.
Agreed.
So, yeah.
I think also some industries are more likely to embrace change, and they're used to change and quick change and fast change than others. You mentioned hospitality, but when you're in most sports, I'd say, not every sport, but in sports, we're always looking for how do we get the boat to go faster? And some sports do that better than others also. We look at technology, data, all every facet of information in order to make the boat go faster or the team play better or the individual. So I do believe that some industries are more likely to embrace change, but challenge change at the same time, like not just change for the change's sake. I think Zoe's mentioned that and Drew mentioned that also about nobody wants to change just unless it does make the boat go faster or more comfortable or safer. There's different industries that will move at different rates to others, and different sports that will move at different rates to others. So, yeah, it's down to individuals, but also I think organisations too. I think and industries that move quicker and are more likely to embrace change rather than repel change.
Drew mentioned this earlier. We talked about sort of what's going on for leaders underneath the surface of all this when people do push back or when they resist a bit. And I think it's important that we do explore that. We do find out the why. And there are a lot of whys that it could potentially be. So what are some of the whys that you guys have come across when you've met resistance from other people?
I think there could be a number of ones. I always go back to, I think human beings are quite protective of themselves and we want to survive. So I think that will always give them a part of it where they want to make sure they protect themselves and they're okay. Because change is absolutely, we all want things to change. When it affects us, that's probably a slightly different conversation. And even when we make the choices, choices are powerful. But I remember when I moved to this house, we were dead excited about moving, but the day we actually moved, it was a nightmare. I couldn't work anything. And I was going, I just want to be in my old house again. This is crap. I don't want to be here anymore. And it's the same with my kids. Lads, I hope you're not listening. Well, we're excited about having a kid. Then the kid comes along and you're having breakfast at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because you've not slept and you're thinking, what's just happened here? I think you've got to get through some of that stuff. So I think it's about having the conversation, I think. And one of my favorite quotes on change comes from John Maxwell when he says, change is a process, not an event. And I see too many times where people, carefully think about it, boom, big hit, big communication, and then it ends. And I'm a bit like, you've got to keep talking. The communication's got to carry on going because people will go away because you've been spending 6 months thinking about this. You give people 6 seconds to get it, and then you think they've got it and they're going to understand it. I think you've got to keep the communication going because change is a process, not an event. And I think that's a key thing to remember, where you can do change with people and not to them. So that's, I think, part of having the conversations. But I think there is a watch out, and I am absolutely agreeing with Zoe. So this isn't and against what Zoe's just said, because you've got to talk to the people who have an issue with it, but don't get stuck in there and sucked in there and don't come out. So, for example, in education, it's very easy to spend all your time with the naughty kids who aren't behaving. And I remember there was a year 9 girl once who pulled me up and said, but we behave really well, Mr. Povey, and we don't get much time with you. And actually, that was a great leadership lesson for me, that there will be some people in businesses that are just unhappy because of their personal circumstances. You could give them an extra day off, a 10 grand pay rise and a gold clock, and they'll still whinge. So you could spend a lot of time doing stuff with them and not actually get anywhere. So I think, yes, you've got to address it and talk to them, but I think it's about spreading yourself across the people who are, I can kind of see it, but give me a bit more. And the people who are well up for it, you've got to spend time with them too, because they're the ones who can be the change architects for you as well. They can be the thermostats that can dial things up and dial things down in the business. So I think that I'd say that's probably why people do it. And even though we choose things, sometimes we don't always remember the why. So I think it's regular communication, smart communication, doing it with, making sure it's a process, not an event, but not getting stuck with the people that can just whinge for whinge's sake. because that will suck the life out of you. You know, that can really be very difficult to manage. And also, it's probably not going to let you do the thing that you want to do at pace.
Absolutely. I mean, there's that old statement of, 10% of your people will take up 90% of your time. The challenge is not to let it get to that point. You don't want to be spending 90% of your time with a very, very small part of the population of your team, because it's draining for you for a start. But like you say, when it comes to change, it's not actually helping anything move forward. If they're still going to be whinging at the end of it, even when the change is implemented, that's a lot of time wasted. That's a lot of energy wasted, and it's attention taken away from the people that are actually willing to embrace this and really power it through and make sure that it's successful.
I was just thinking, there's a saying, well, we say in the police, nobody's happy unless they've got something to whinge about. So we definitely can't spend all the time listening to them, because it would be a full-time job in itself. And yeah, totally agree with what Drew's saying. I think one of my favorite models when it comes to change is the Kubler-Ross change curve. And I know it wasn't originally designed for organizational change. I think it's a great visual for people to be able to see where they are and what's happening. I think for a lot of people, just understanding that whatever they're feeling is actually quite normal. I think people, especially dependent on what the change is, sometimes I think people are quite surprised at how strong they feel about the change. But picking up also on what Drew was saying, that we're hardwired, aren't we, to look for the negatives, to look for the risks. We're self-preservation, self-protection is what's most important. So picking up on what Tony was saying at the beginning, if we don't understand where do we fit into this, whenever we would bring up a new structure chart, it doesn't matter what you're saying in that moment, you need to just be quiet for the first 2 minutes, let people work out where they are, because they're not listening until they've worked out, where am I in all of this? What does this mean for me? And once they've worked that bit out, then they'll be tuned back into the rest of the message that you need to relay. So understanding what's in it for them. But I think one of the most important things for me is that often, because of the way our brains work, it feels a lot bigger than it actually is. So they're looking for all of the changes and not necessarily looking for what's not changing and what's still going to stay the same. And that for me is a big part of that feeling. And it's that question, okay, what are thoughts and feelings, and what's actually fact? What's in your control? What can you influence? What's not in your control? But also what's not changing? What's still going to be the same? Because we can look at everything that is changing, but look at how much of your day-to-day is still going to be exactly the same. And that just helps them to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Whereas I think often that initial resistance is everything's changing and it's all going to feel very different. And that can feel very overwhelming for people. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of overwhelm within that. So I think sometimes that I think that would be that was the first thing that came to my mind when you asked the question. And we can support that. Leaders can support a lot of that by just asking some questions about what's not going to change. Okay, what is the resistance? What's the transition? And help them to picture the new normal, that phase 3 of the change curve, and really see the new normal, what's going to be different, what's going to be the same, and what the benefits will be. And that then helps people to know what they're moving towards. I think it's that uncertainty sometimes of, okay, I don't know what that looks like. So now I'm imagining all of the worst case scenarios. That's what we do. And so actually, the more information we give about the new normal and the more we help people to have that vision of what that's going to look like, the easier it becomes for them to start to move forward. They're probably going to bounce around a fair bit in the middle, as we all do, but it does give them a focus and that positive motivation to move towards.
Because that word everything is so easy to integrate, isn't it, into change? When it gets that big, we just go, everything is changing. It's so easy to scale it up that quickly.
Laura, just back to the original question on it too, about, where do you get resistance from some leaders? And some of them just don't know how to do it. Just haven't experienced it before or had to go through it. Or hadn't had to lead it themselves. So some of it's finding out different ways of explaining that change too. You know, they may have only been exposed to one way of change in the past, or two ways, and there might be 25 ways. So I don't think it's always resistance to change. Just sometimes people just not sure how to go about it. Or they know that there needs to be a change, but I don't know the best way to explain it to everybody. And that's where that creates fear for the person who's implementing the change, as well as the person receiving the change message too. And that's where, you know, and I've done some sessions on change with Drew, and that's why he's so good at explaining to leaders of different methods of change, you know, and that opens up their eyes. So then they've got a choice of how they go about it, what suits their personality, which style suits their personality, and that's going to work for the greatest amount of the staff that he's leading, so, or she's leading. So sometimes it's just the knowledge of how to go about it creates fear. You know, it's not the actual change itself, it's just how to go about it.
What we're getting to here is uncertainty. It's the unknown. And human beings don't deal with that well. I mean, there's a really interesting study done on this, which basically said that at the end of the study, uncertainty is worse for us than bad news. Which, if you think about that, makes absolutely no sense. Right? Archie de Burke did this research, and it was about, there were two chairs in a room, and there were two queues for the chair. And in chair A, you were going to get a mild electric shock. It was only mild. It wasn't like some weird study, right? It was a mild electric shock. And then in the other chair, chair B, you might or you might not have got one. And the most nervous queue was chair B. And again, logically, it'll make sense because there's still hope, right? There's still a chance. A bit like our Dumb and Dumber sketch. So you're telling me there's still a chance. It's like, doesn't make sense, but that's what happens. We know uncertainty is a real problem, and we are fearful. The loss aversion Zoe was talking about, what we're going to lose here. And, you know, we worry. And there's a great stat from Psychology Today, you know, 92% of the things we worry about don't happen. And of the remaining 8%, 7 of that percent are never as bad as we thought in the first place. So none of that works. Worry is, as the saying goes, like a rocking chair. Gives you something to do, but it don't get you very, you know, far. It don't get you anywhere. And then I think that people will feel out of the comfort zone. So they're the negative bits of uncertainty. But then Tony and I, when we work together on it, we talk about the positive sides. Uncertainty is where innovation lives. Any great innovation came from a place of uncertainty. And Tony talks about that brilliantly. What Tony did in rugby league in this country, I observed, and it was incredible, a different way of playing. Success everywhere he went, but it was uncertain, a lot of that, but that's where great innovation comes from. Or go to Steve Jobs at Apple. Everyone laughed at him when he said about an iPod. Well, no one wants to put the music on and download the CDs. Oh, don't worry about that. I've thought about that. We're going to have iTunes. We're going to buy record labels, and the rest is history, and the iPhone and the iPad. And that. Uncertainty is where the innovation happens. Uncertainty is where we learn and grow. You know, it's about when we toddled into school as kids, particularly for me, I didn't even know what I had on that day. Never mind. That wasn't when I was a teacher, by the way, to be clear. That would be more unprofessional. But as a kid, like going in school, you don't know what you're going to be doing that day. You don't know whether you can do it. Well, you go in and you just give it your best. But of course, as we get older, the point a few people have made already, we want a bit more certainty. But it's where we learn and grow. And it's where we get the best out of ourselves and we reach our potential. And as I say to most people I meet, I've still never met anyone that's fully reached their potential, because guess what? There's always more to go. And then the final thing we often talk about is that uncertainty, and people want to punch me in the face when I say this, and I understand that. And no, I want to punch me in the face anyway. I've got one of those faces, I think. But uncertainty is exhilarating. It is. I mean, like, I don't get this, by the way, but why would somebody tie a giant elastic band around their ankle and jump off something they've got no right jumping off? Bungee jumping, skydiving, what a stupid idea that is for anyone to do. Just increasing my risk of death. Not on my to-do list today. But people do it because it's the excitement and uncertainty. And in the world Tony's lived in, and he'll talk about it's a lot better than I will. You talk to any athlete, do they want to play in the game that's certain, where they're going to win 5-0 or 60-0 in rugby, or do they want to play in the big occasion against the best teams that's riddled with uncertainty? So again, it's how you choose to look at it. And that for me is the leader's job. Like, we've got a way in which we can help our people see uncertainty. It's the framing of it. Framing makes a picture look absolutely fantastic or distinctly average. And I think that that is part of the leadership rhetoric and getting our head around uncertainty, because Zoe's right, negativity bias, the Roy Baumeister stuff, that exists, right? We just get pulled toward the negatives. Our brains are hardwired to see the negatives. But actually, imagine conversations around the benefit, about what we could be, where we could go, and what we could do. Now that, by the way, is the leadership element.
100%. I absolutely love that.
It's the
That's a brilliant
childlike
perspective.
curiosity that we lose as adults of just going, but what, it's the difference between, well, what if, to, but what if? It's the same two words, same question, as Drew was saying, like two completely different frames. Yeah, and I think leaders can influence that, can't control it, but can influence in how you relay those messages and how you engage those conversations and allow people to be curious.
Yeah.
Don't shut it down. Allow people to be curious and ask lots of questions and be innovative. Make those suggestions of, well, what if? What could we do this too? I think that's what's missing, but that's a big part of the shame of adulting, isn't it? Is we lose the curiosity, we lose the excitement of curiosity, and we desperately try to control everything and anything. And when we let go of the need for control and we step back into that curiosity, it makes things so much easier to work through. And okay, it's going to happen, we'll work it out. And I think that's the other thing of having a team that you trust their competency and you trust their ability to move through this, and reassuring them and talking through and saying, we'll work it out. We've got a team that, like, we're bright people here. We'll work it out. It will happen. There will be times where it doesn't go to plan, but we can work that out. It's that reassurance that they have what it takes to come out of this the other side and make it better. And it's probably not going to be smooth running, but that's okay, because we can deal with that. Going back to the sport analogy, the tougher the challenge, the more we learn about ourselves, the more opportunities there are to step up and engage in something we might not have the opportunity to do before. And that's when we get to be better. So I think, as Drew was saying, there's two very different frames. And one is very much the doom and gloom and, oh God, change is happening to us and we're going to have to do this. And we've all had leaders that have communicated it that way. And we've also had leaders that have been excited about the change and welcomed the opportunities that happen within the chaos of change.
I think it's down to the perspective of the team quite a lot as well. A big example I pulled from this summer, actually, was the Lionesses. Bearing in mind what happened at the previous Euros, where basically we just rolled right through and won the thing, like, hands down, complete landslide. When we lost the first game this year, immediately questions started coming out about whether Serena Wiegman should resign or whether she was still the right person to lead the Lionesses. And I just sat there scratching my head, because I was like, did you not see what she did during that first game? They had a multitude of changes within the team itself, because several players had retired, some were injured. Obviously, you're going to a different set of teams this time as well. You might face some similar opponents, but ultimately it's different teams in the beginning. And then she sat through that whole first game scribbling notes. It was going terribly wrong, but she spent the whole game writing notes, because she was like, we're trying something new. We're trying a strategy with this new team, this new formation of team. And I'm going to sit here writing notes. And what happened from then? Win after win after win after win after win. Because it was learning from that experience. It was about being brave enough to fail and go, okay, we're going to fail and learn from it and move on and make sure that we're more successful in the future.
It also shows the danger of the power of something that you mentioned earlier about social media. Do you ask the masses whether she should still be coaching when they have a rough patch? No. there's your answer. That's how you can ask too many people's opinions or the wrong people's opinions as well on all those sort of things. But yeah, I'm trying to tie in with you as well, Laura, but I think it's a relevant point to make that, of course, anybody in their right mind wouldn't have questioned, should she be changed just because the team was going through a rougher period? And that's why it's important to ask the right people what the changes need to be. I know we live in a democracy, but sometimes if you ask too many people on topics that they don't really have enough knowledge to give an answer to, they give an answer anyway, and that can be detrimental. I'm not going against our current system. I'm not getting political here, but if you get what I mean, even within your own company, and I think Drew touched on that, and so did Zoe earlier. It's where you ask the questions can have an influence on how smooth things run also, and knowing where to ask the right questions and who of, so as to get the best answers also. And that's why challenging is, once again, the good part of change as well. It is fundamental. Otherwise, we get too erratic with our change, and we do in sport, and I did as a coach at times, try to do things too quickly, and instead of having the challenge alongside of it. Change is wonderful, but challenge needs to be with it, and to keep us on track. Yeah, that's for sure.
Drew mentioned about people sort of worrying about that uncertainty all the time. I think a big place I've seen that is where leaders have to make a personal change within themselves. So a common thing in the industries I've worked in is a constant pattern of overworking. And there's always this thing of people just sort of say, oh, well, I just overwork. I just work late. I always take my laptop home, or I start first thing in the morning, or because I'm working from home and I'm not traveling, I'm going to work during my travel time. What would have been my travel time? So people overwork consistently, but they justify that. And I know when I've done that, because I'm certainly not innocent of that, I know in those areas where I personally have pushed back that kind of attempt to change my own behaviours, it's been a feeling of undermining my mastery as a leader. It's been, imposter syndrome kick. It's been all these other things that have come into play. And I've justified the overworking somehow to make it all better. And it was so common amongst so many of my colleagues as well. So somebody would say, you really should stick to your working hours. And that would be met with a shrug and a smile and a, yeah, probably, but, the place would fall apart without me. Or this is just how we do things around here, or I'm just really committed. But actually I even met one leader. She used to do 12 to 16-hour days every single day of the week without breaks. And she was actively justifying why she wouldn't take a break. Now, I didn't always take all my break, but I at least took some. And I couldn't figure out why she just justified not taking any breaks ever, any day. So that was what I suppose was my next question, was like, where you guys have perhaps had challenges with your own personal changes as leaders. What would you say was happening behind that for you?
Just picking up on that point, I think you made a really important one. People justify things. So they do things and then justify it. If you've heard of the elephant and the rider in terms of our thinking, a lot is intuition. We just do something and then we justify why we're doing that. Or, there's a way around of doing that. And I think leaders can fall into that trap. I do think leaders like to be needed, like to be wanted, like to feel significant and important. I think that's for any person, not just a leader. So I think actually doing more and living a slightly chaotic existence, you can get addicted to that chaos. I'm sure everybody on the call has seen that. People addicted to the craziness because they think that's actually what it is. But I think having things in place where you track yourself and having other good people around you where they can question some of that. So I was working with someone this morning, I was questioning some of that. Well, we need to look at that, I think, because that's not going to be something that is sustainable over the long period. And actually, you're going to be doing your best work. Some of the things that you see in sport, people have a tendency to think they're at it all. They're in the gym for 6 hours a day and stuff. And actually, we know it's not like that. They kind of come in, it can be quite short and sharp on a lot of days. They're not doing as much as you'd think, but that's because we get it done with quality, and we try and be as efficient as possible. And I think if leaders are falling into that trap, they need to catch themselves pretty quickly, and they need to challenge that, and they need to change that 3-step model of catch it, challenge it, change it, because that's not going to lead to a good place. And therefore, again, going back to your very original question, what do we do? That's one of the reasons why I do the training in the ice baths. You know, I hate the phrase because it's all cheesy and boring and you've heard it 1,000 times, but here's 1,001. You got to put your own oxygen mask on first, because if you can't help you can't help anyone else. And that for me is, I think it's quite easy to fall into that trap as a leader, to try and be all things to all people, underpants on the outside of your trousers, Superman, Wonder Woman, whatever. We're going out, we're going to change the world, and I'm here for everyone, every second of every day. And at some point I'll have a kit and I'll have something to eat, and maybe as an optional extra see my family. Like, it's not going to work that way, and you're not going to get the best out of someone in that way. So that's a big pickup for me that would need challenging. And sometimes you can't see it because you're so close in it, and you just see it as this is the way it is. And we use the phrase, it is what it is. It's part of it. I'm paid well. It's not. Stop it. Grow up. Look at it. Challenge yourself. And maybe there's a different way of doing things, and a better way. There's probably not a better way of doing it.
Yeah, and that comes from the messaging, I think, that your leaders give you as well. Like, you know, servant leadership is a big thing in hospitality because we are a service industry. But the message that got across to me and a lot of my colleagues was everybody before you, which is the basic foundation of anything to do with servant leadership. But eventually that became everybody to the exclusion of you.
Yeah.
And nobody draws the line for you.
Leaders eat last, but they do still eat.
They do still eat.
I think it changes at different stages in your career also, some of those things. And I think, you know, some of the hours and the intensity of work in the early days are necessary, and to a large degree. Listen, I'm not going to argue against excess. And if we're talking excess, I totally agree with all of you. But I'm one of these who challenge things, and I'm going to throw the little hand grenade in at different stages. And at different stages in my career as a coach, if I had have done any less hours, and maybe it's the addiction part of it that you're talking about, Drew, but I absolutely loved it. It was the long hours and the commitment to it, and I loved it. I enjoyed it. I don't know if there was stress. I don't know if I felt any stress. There was pressure to deliver, and we had to win games and different, but I was just in my element too. So at different, and I agree, I wouldn't have been able to sustain those levels all throughout my career and age groups. So it does change. But I'm also going to challenge at certain periods of your life, when you're in something that you love as your job, you can do those mad hours for long times, and it makes you a better person for the people around you. I think I was a better person during those periods of time than sometimes when I'd go, oh, I'm going to go home and look after myself a bit more, and I'll be climbing the walls because I wasn't doing some of what I loved as much. So, yeah, it's knowing where you are at what part of your career also. You know, once again, it's individuals, isn't it? It's, you know, and it's working out where each leader is at in their career, whether they're overdoing it, not doing enough. We justify going home early sometimes too.
Yeah, it's a choice, Tony. It goes back to that choice element. You know, if we choose, there's some great research come out about people who do 4-day weeks. And a lot of the people who do 4-day weeks work on the Friday, if it's the Friday they have off. And none of them mind, because it's the I can see Zoe going, here I am.
I'm here. I don't work on a Friday, but I'm here because I choose to be, because I said to Laura, there's no way I'm missing out on this.
Yeah, cool.
I will work.
Yeah, well, good on. I almost feel so. You've got to listen to me and Tony, but it's but I think a lot of it will come down to a choice. But to add to Tony's point, I think it's less about time management. And I got onto this a few years ago, a bit late to be honest. But I think energy management's bigger.
100%.
So if you've got the energy to do it and you want to do it, it's a choice, then that is really interesting. Now, I have noticed the pattern, and I'm just talking about myself there, right? So I don't want to give it for anybody else, but the energy I had in my 30s was significantly different to what I've got now in my 40s. And coming to late 40s now, and it's not as good as it was in my early 40s. So I've got to manage that carefully. And that comes down to self-awareness, yes, and then self-management, of course. I think it's about energy management. And too many people look at their diaries and put things in time, but actually, where's your energy? So if you'd have asked me to do this podcast late afternoon, the answer would have probably been no, because it would have been worse than it currently is for me, right? Because it would have been like, as the day goes. So I know that my energy is good in the morning, and I know the kind of days, and I know my pattern. And when you're aware of that, I think you can manage your energy. Because I think there is a call sometimes where Tony's right, actually, on this, and it's a very good point he's making. Sometimes people go, no, well, you just work your hours, and that's what you kind of do, and that's what, we need to do that in today's workplace, and it's about equity in it. But actually, there's certain times where you have got to go full metal jacket. You got to go headlong into it and put your crash helmet on, and it's hard, and it's tough, but I think it's got to be on something you want, choice of it, and you've got to have the energy. Because energy, of course, is very important, because then we don't reach burnout. But if it's not your choice, I think it's that Adam Grant stuff he talks about, which is bore out, where you just get bored of the same shit that you're doing day in, day out. Sorry, I just swore. A bit late, innit? Edit it out.
You're a head teacher too. You were a head teacher. Listen.
Well, that's a bit...
Yes.
He's had the years of holding it in.
I was the worst head teacher. I was actually an RE teacher of all things.
Yeah.
Tambourines took down there.
No,
but yeah, no, I think energy management's key. I really do.
I think it's energy management. Totally agree. I think it's also priority management. So it's the balance between the energy and the priority. So what Tony's talking about, that for you right there at that time, that's your priority. That's what's most important. That's choice. So you have decided in that time that is a priority for you. That's where you want your energy to go. That's choice. And I think work-life balance is very individual for different people. And you'll have different times in your life where, okay, work right now is the most important thing to me. You're starting a new business, or you're in a new job and you've got a probation period to get through. Right now, this needs my energy. This needs my focus. This is a priority. When things change, families or different priorities or hobbies, then that becomes the priority, and your energy goes into that and less elsewhere. And I think that's, when we talk about burnout, we've got that mismatch of energy, mismatch of resources, mismatch of values. Those are all the things that drain our energy very, very quickly when it doesn't align. And I think that is the most important thing. What I would say is that what you're talking about here is behavior change. And I think I've rolled out technology, I've rolled out system changes, I've rolled out organizational structure changes. Behavior change, I would say, is probably the hardest. And even when you've got somebody sitting in front of you who is 100% sold to the fact that they need to make a change, that doesn't make the change any easier. And I think for me, to go to your example of working long hours, quite often there are inefficiencies and it's not as effective. And I think it's very easy to say, I'll just work longer hours. But actually, we need to step back and look at how we can be more efficient, how we can be more effective. Because when we manage our time and our energy and our priorities, we are more efficient, we are more effective, we become better leaders in the process because we're working on what needs to be worked on when it needs to be worked on, which is what our team want us to do, rather than working long hours. The question is, what do we have to show for it? If you're going to work 12 hours, do you have 12 hours of work to show for it? And does that align with what your priorities are? Because often it's not the case. And that's quite often where I'm challenging is, I think you can improve your efficiencies. You can be more effective and actually work less hours in the process. The big conversation I have with people is, could you take a week off? Could you have a week off of work, zero stress and zero guilt? Because that's, for a lot of people, is the balance. Like, I will give you 100% when I'm there, but I also want to be able to walk away from it and give 100% to my family, to my hobbies, to my personal life when I'm not working. And that's the balance. I think behavior change probably has the most resistance, whether that's conscious or unconscious. I think even people who want to change, there's a lot of internal resistance goes on under the surface, which makes it harder.
I think a big thing that I have addressed with a few clients in the past and a few colleagues in the past is the narrative that they tell themselves about themselves, that identity piece, because it's so easy to get caught in that identity of, well, I'm the person that's committed. I'm the person that leaves the office last. I'm the person that's always here first. I'm the person that works through my breaks. And that's the first thing that they would say about themselves, rather than I'm committed because I work hard when I'm here, or I'm the person that is reliable for either telling you the answer or going and finding out. They don't tell themselves that narrative. They tell themselves the other narrative, which is what they've then potentially come to believe other people would say about them. So then it's this kind of, well, if I do something different, who am I? There's this whole uncertainty piece coming back in again of who will I be if I change my behavior?
It's also the culture that we create with those behaviors. And that's where we need to raise that awareness. As for those in a leadership position, for those who have that influence, it's not what we say, it's what we do. It's exactly the same with parenting, isn't it? We can say all of the right things. You need to look after yourself, work-life balance. We can say all of those things. But if we are then the leader who doesn't take a meal break and who doesn't go home on time and who sends emails or creates a pressure for quick replies on things, it's the behaviors that shape the culture within our team. And sometimes we need to hold the mirror up and say, okay, how am I enabling some of these behaviors that are a challenge within my team and preventing high performance? And where am I influencing this and enabling this by my own behaviors? And that's a hard question to answer, which is why a lot of people don't ask it.
Well, listen, I'm guilty of all of that, and not getting it all right at different stages. It's recognizing when change is needed in yourself. But Drew has been part of my network, but having people around you to remind you of some of those things sometimes. When you're in it as a leader, you don't realize sometimes. You just full steam ahead, and it's people around you that you trust, and you create a network that they're able to say, hey, are you doing enough for yourself at the moment? Are you spending enough time at home or away, or do you need to just get away from it for a while? And that's important as a leader, to create that network around you, whether that's from the people at your working place or just outside of it. It's really important. And listen, I don't think we get any of those things 100% right all the time. And don't bash yourself up about it when it does happen, but recognize it when you can. But guilty on all of it, and going to, sometimes too much one way than the other. And sometimes you're just not aware of it when you're in it, unless you listen to the people around you that mean most to you, really.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, to reiterate what you said earlier about like asking the right questions to the right people in the right places, just getting the trusted and valued advice. I suppose that's another point to bring up, though, isn't it? About that idea of failure or mistakes or not always getting it right along the way. That actually this illusion of perfect leadership, especially when it comes to change, just it doesn't exist, right?
Absolutely.
What does it look like?
I think people question even if you appeared perfect on the surface, and what is perfect anyway? I mean, perfect according to who? Even if you appeared perfect on the surface, people are going to be suspicious of that because it's just not doable, and actually it's not relatable either. And in my experience, the best leaders are the ones who say, I don't know. They're the ones who say, I got that wrong. They're the ones that say, I'm working on that. And the ones that have that self-awareness to recognize knowledge gaps, skills gaps, action gaps, behavior gaps. The ones that say, hey, I'm human too, because again, it creates that culture and a safe space for other people to say, I got that wrong, or I'm working on that, or I need some help with that. This is a struggle for me right now. So I think, and the tiptoe around how I say this, I think vulnerability, I worry, has gone too far in terms of leadership, of showing vulnerability. I think there's an element of being open and transparent in a way that aligns with who you are and what you feel comfortable sharing. I do worry that there is an element that the authentic, or how people perceive what authentic leadership looks like, has perhaps tipped a little bit. And I think that worries me, if I'm being totally honest. It does worry me. And I think LinkedIn, I think it shows people stating that they're sharing their vulnerability. I'm not sure that's always helpful in a workplace with a team that are looking to you for support and guidance. I think there is a balance of showing your team that you are human and a work in progress, because that helps create a safe space, psychological space for people to share. I think I think it needs to be very careful about what we choose to share, how we choose to share, and when we choose to share, because that could undo all of that very quickly by saying, well, I can't go and speak to them because look at what they've got going on and they haven't got capacity to deal with that, or question capability and ability. So I think it's a very fine line, and it's a very subjective line, but I do worry that sometimes authentic leadership tiptoes into something else, which I don't have a name for.
If it tips over, or people are doing it for the wrong reasons, then it is
Performative.
Authentic anyway. You know, they're doing it for a purpose to get a reaction.
Yeah.
If it's authentic, I think most of the time people will accept their vulnerability if it is no matter how bad it is. But I can't agree with you more also. I would like to think I was honest with the people that I led, but there was inappropriate times to put some of that out there to them as well. That as a leader, well, I don't need to tell you everything about my vulnerability or the vulnerability of them, their team. I'd have to protect them from some of that at certain points in time. If the insinuation is that there's people out there that are showing how vulnerable they are in order to show what a up-to-date leader they are, that isn't authentic. That is not authentic. You know, and being authentic is being genuine about it, but also having judgments of time and place and purpose of doing it.
Where you do it. I think where you do it matters. You
Absolutely.
know, you can have that conversation within a team, Tony. In one of your instances, I've seen you do it on many occasions, but what you say in the press is not that.
No.
And, you know, we talked about this earlier, didn't we? Leaders are dealers in hope, right? We know that. So if you stand in front of your team and go, well, we're screwed. Like, there's only one way you're going now. And that might be how you feel. But sometimes you've got to go, if you look at so many leaders throughout history did it. If you read about Winston Churchill during World War II, he was like going, we are screwed here. But he didn't say that to Great Britain, and he came out with a load of hope. And I do think that it's good to, I've got so many car crashes in my career and life, as I think everybody has. You got to own those, and they're great learning points, and you definitely learn more during difficult times than you do in the good times. I was doing a talk a few years ago with Francois Pienaar, and he was obviously telling his story about working with Nelson Mandela in South Africa and apartheid. It was incredible. And at the end, we did a Q&A, and someone said, what's a big leadership thing, Drew, you think? And Matthew Syed's book, Black Box Thinking, had come out recently, and I talked about learning from failure and how fantastic it is to kind of get hold of that and learn and get better. And we shouldn't shy away from it. So we don't, there is that balance, Goldilocks principle, you get it just right. We don't want to not talk about the problems, because then issues don't get dealt with, and he was brilliant. He said, yeah, but it's the same when you win. He said, because when you win, we often go, let's go to the pub. We don't learn from that either. But so I think there's learning on both ends of the spectrum. Probably most of the honest learning happens somewhere in the middle, where it's not too tragic, so we don't have to admit it. Mm-hmm. But there is that bit now where if we're leading, we're going somewhere, we want to take people somewhere. And I think there is a very careful balance. I understand why you're saying it like that, Zoe, but I was getting lots of thumbs up, which obviously listeners won't hear, because it is an important point. You can't go out there and say, as I said before, hey, we're screwed, I'm screwed, I don't, that's it, shut the doors, because the humans, again, will do amazing things, and we will get through difficult times. And sometimes you've got to keep a little bit of that in yourself. By the way, I'm not saying you wouldn't, as picking up Tony's point, great network. Tony, in my network, and he will talk to me and I'll talk to him about stuff. And I might share some of that with Tony. But the appropriateness of the communication of that can be an absolute car crash for an organization, for a team, for individuals within it, if the wrong message gets out in the wrong way. So like most things in life, it's a balance and a blend, and we won't always get that right. But when those problems come, it's what we do with them, and we take the learning. And something Tony said to me very, very years ago, this when we very first met, he said, hey, you'll learn as much stuff about what not to do from leaders as you will learn what to do from leaders. And I thought that was great, because you were always learning if you've got that curious mindset, as we talked about earlier, which is, I think, the biggest thing on this topic today is getting curious and helping people get curious and understanding Kubler-Ross. Let's get to acceptance as quick as we can, but let's get curious. And the more curious we get, the more learning we get and the better we get. And that in itself is the journey up the mountain. And sometimes you have to take a couple of steps back to go forward. But I think they're all important learning points on that journey.
We need to be personal. We need to be relatable, but we also need to be credible. And that's, for me, is the tipping point. And it's when it's appropriate, but also what's appropriate to share with your team. And that you've got peers and you've got your line manager, and you might have a coach and you might have a mentor. They may be more appropriate people to share that with. And whilst it might be in a one-to-one conversation, if one of your team shares something very personal with you in terms of empathy and relationship building and trust building, it might be appropriate on that occasion to share something, a little bit of yourself, that helps them to recognize they're sitting with somebody who gets it, who knows, and perhaps who's been there. I think more public sharing within the team announcement style, not quite so helpful. So I think it's situational, it's what's appropriate, and it's personal, relatable, but also credible. And I think that as a leader, that's the credible. Again, different leaders will have a different hierarchy as to where they sit and what's most important, probably be shaped by values. And it's very important for individuals to align with what's most important to them. Some people are very open people, some people are very closed people, but it's what's appropriate for you, but also what's appropriate for the team. And we certainly don't want the team or an individual to be feeling incredibly uncomfortable because you've shared something that you feel very comfortable sharing, and them not so much. That's for me.
Their ego will judge that sometimes too, the leader. And Laura, I was keen to talk about your question in answer your question earlier as well, when you went about the failures or mistakes, and in coming from a sporting arena or being a former coach in that area, we're used to failure. We're used to, and we actually encourage it. We train to our limits and find where our limits are, and then say, can we go a little bit further than what we think our limits are? Can you try to do something a little bit more than what you did yesterday? So we're actually encouraging our people that we're coaching to develop greater skills, become faster, stronger, bigger, smarter. It's constantly, and we're challenging ourselves in that industry as well as coaches. Can I be better? Like, yeah, I'm okay out here, but if I go over there, I got that wrong. Oh, but I learned something from it. We make it really temporary. When we make mistakes, we make it really temporary. And we also take the lessons from it, go, oh, yeah, if you do it that way, that's why it doesn't work. So we actually encourage failure and losing some of the best lessons I've ever learned from losing, but also the coping, resilience, developing resilience by making it temporary. I lost today, but from that, I'm going to take the lesson so I can win tomorrow. That's the beauty and some of the lessons from sport that I think are transferable into industries and all industries and families and life as well. We put too much emphasis on the win and the loss, and yeah, we all want to win. That's great. It's a great feeling. It's better than feeling like losing. But when we lose, it's for a purpose and it's for a meaning, and it makes us stronger, and that gives us a better taste when we do win. It's how we handle those losses and those mistakes that I think determines the best leaders and the best teams and the best communities.
I think a big place I tried my hardest, I think this is where I put the most effort in, was when decisions, this is definitely a thing from the corporate world, where decisions from the powers that be above were made, that you as the leader can clearly see it not going to work, but you are going to put your all into it, and you know that it's going to fail, but ultimately that's not your team's fault, that's not your fault, you've just got to try your best with what you're given, so you do it. But the way I always tried to present it to my team was every last thing is an opportunity. Because even though you didn't make the decision, you didn't make the plan, you didn't build the resources, you didn't give us what we've got now, what you can do is say, oh, here's that thing that you could do a little bit better. Or here's an idea how we could adapt that to make it fit our model of this business. Because even though we worked in a business with, I think at the time it was something like 850 sites across the country, all operating under the same business model, every single site was completely unique in its own right. So we had to be able to tailor these things. And some of those ideas were great for the small kitchens, but not for the big ones. Some were great for the big ones, but not for the small ones. So It was up to you to identify where actually you're going to fall down as a team because of decisions that were made above you. But go, okay, what can we now say back to corporate?
Yeah.
To say, this is how we can make this change really work for us, but it's going to need that overhaul, this address, this question answered, that thing implemented. It's all about constantly moving with it. So when my team were able to see it as an opportunity because I saw it as an opportunity, that's when, as you say, all those lessons from failure, from mistakes, all that sort of thing came through because we were expecting that failure to happen.
Yeah. You don't get that data unless you push it to failure. And this is the challenge, is sometimes it's very easy to sit there and say, that's not going to work. But how do you know? How do you know unless you give it 100%, push it to the point where it passes or fails, or succeeds or fails, and then you gather the data, and then you take that data, and then you work out what's next. When I haven't played a team sport, my sport was in strength training, where you push to failure because you don't know how strong you are until you fail the last rep. And then you take that data okay, do I need to eat more? Do I need to sleep more? Do I need to change my technique? And that's what then helps the next weight and the next rep. And the same, so basketball is the sport I watch, I don't play. But last season, we had a change of coach, and he had a very different style to the coach the year before. And the team, they weren't convinced that approach would work. The conversation that we had was, well, we won't know unless we try. And we all have to give 100% to the instructions, to this method, to this process, to know whether or not it works or it doesn't work. And if we give it 100% and it doesn't work, we then know, we can then have that conversation to say, we tried it, we gave it 100%, we were fully invested in trying to make it work. It hasn't worked for these reasons. Now we can make some change and try again. But if we stand there and say it's not going to work, there's no data. There's just opinions and perspectives,
You'll be right.
of which there are lots of, and none of them may be fact. So we need that failure, and we try and keep it safe, don't we? It's a very, again, it's a very human characteristic to stay in that little space where we do the things that we think we're going to be good at, or we push it to the point where, actually, this is still success, but I'm not going to go any further because then that's failing. So it's a very natural way of responding to things. But actually, if we're changing, we have to be brought into that change to know whether or not it works or not. So sometimes that shifting that resistance to it, that's never going to work, and we're reinventing the wheel and all of the other things that come out. We can be resistant to the change, but we can't say for fact that it's not going to change until we push it to failure. And then sometimes we push it for failure and success then happens. But sometimes that's part of the process. Is we fail, we learn, we fail, we learn, we fail, we learn, we succeed.
And I think that's possibly where, on the very rare occasion, we might be fortunate and unfortunate, where we have a fortunate run of complete success and then have to face failure. That's probably the hardest point to get to. I do have, some clients, some former colleagues who've had huge runs of success. And it wasn't for want of trying to fail or trying to make a mistake here and there. They've tried to push themselves and push their limits, and they've actually been incredibly successful in whatever their goals were or their career was. And then when it came to the point of facing failure or a potential big mistake, it was like, oh, goodness. And it was suddenly the big shock of, again, that uncertainty of what's going to happen to me. Am I going to fall down a cliff edge here?
Yeah.
But it was only through trying.
This is what Tony was saying. We need the losses to build the resilience, to keep that momentum going. If you've got teams that have been successful for years and then fail, they don't have the resilience that the teams that have built themselves up from the bottom have built that resilience along the way. So that fall from the clock feels a lot harder because we don't have that resilience. So again, I think this picks back up into what we were talking in the first question of that resilience to change. And the more we face change and we learn to come through it. So it's not necessarily about the easy route. It's the adversity that builds the resilience that actually then when the next change happens, but it's like, well, it is what it is. This change, we'll be all right. We'll work through it. Like we've been through worse things. And that's building a resilient team. That's your team that will perform at a high level because they've been through that adversity. They've been tested. They've tried. They know what they're capable of because they've put it to the test and come out the other side. We can't shy away from failing. That's where the tough bit comes in, So, but that for a lot of people is very uncomfortable. So, balancing that too.
There's some really interesting research on this that I came across when we were doing the When the Clouds Come book, and it was something called ambiguity tolerance, where we're really bad with ambiguity now. And actually, we should make ourselves do something that is really uncomfortable, even small things like brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. Like, try doing that. There's toothpaste everywhere. It's ridiculous. Like, you look like a clown at the end of it. Or you go to a different supermarket and, it's really frustrating. Like, who will put the biscuits there? And why is the bread over there? Like, it doesn't make sense. Drive a different way to work. Do something different because we do get in these patterns and we stay safe because it's what we like. And that's some of the resistance stuff. But I've learned, again, Tony's early career is absolutely fascinating in rugby league when he first came to this country. I don't know if you know about it. I don't know if Zoe and Laura know about it, but in terms of dealing with adversity, I don't quite think I've heard of anything like it in sport in my time. And that for me was where a lot of Tony's philosophies were built. And certainly a lot of my learning from Tony has been built too.
Reinforced, not necessarily built, but just briefly, I won't go too far into it, but my first job as a head coach was in this country, and I lost the first 15 games in my career as a rookie head coach, and I kept my job. That adversity or those losses shaped me and reinforced my beliefs, and my beliefs were to get the best out of my team that I could. And I think we were successful in doing that. We weren't good enough to beat the opposition at that point in time, but we were getting the best out of the team as a group and myself. It also taught me to lead. And I think this is what everybody can lead when everything's going well. And back to when I tied it in with your story, Laura, about, success, and then fall off a cliff. And oh my God, it's quite the opposite. What those 15 losses did for me and helped me with was, this is adversity in a lot of respects, but I had to find positives for each of the people, myself included, but the team that I was leading. I had to find wins within the losses. They had to see that they were improving. They had to believe in the processes that we were going through that were going to be right and help them in the long run. But it also taught me as a leader, I used to put myself in their position. Who do you want out in front? Who do you want? What sort of character do you want? Do you want somebody who's slumped over, full of misery, or angry and blaming everybody? Or do you want somebody who's going to stand up each Monday morning and say, right, who's ready to go this week? Who wants to follow me? I had to develop that within myself because of the 15 losses along the way. I had to think about every Monday morning, what sort of energy do I want to give this team? And it taught me a whole lot. So going through that adversity early in my career was a godsend. It was a blessing for me, and I was very lucky to go through it in order to learn a lot about me, but learn a lot about what people want from leadership as well.
And I think that if you look at it, so many people think it's an event that equals the outcome, if you've seen that equation, but it's not. It's your response to an event that will equal the outcome. And we have a lot more control. A lot of times we think something happens and then, well, that's what's going to happen now. But it's what we do with that happens. And when I see great leaders dealing with change or dealing with resistance or dealing with failure, as we've got onto that topic, it's what they do with it. It's okay, so what's your response to it? Where are you going to lead? Because Tony's right. Any idiot can lead when it's going well. But it's when it gets tasty, when it gets tough, when it gets difficult, that's when you find out what leaders are really made of. It's a bit like the famous Eleanor Roosevelt quote, people are like tea bags. You only know how strong they are when you put them in hot water. And Tony definitely, if you think about 15 losses back to back, like that's 15 weeks of just getting beaten and getting beaten. You can imagine the press at the time, getting beaten. Tony's come out as the strongest cup of Yorkshire tea I think there's ever been in life. You can forget PG tips. It's full on Yorkshire gold blend.
Definitely Yorkshire. You can tell by my accent.
Yeah.
It is that adversity that builds you. I mean, whenever I start a new training group, one of the first things I will say to them is that my greatest asset is that everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong in 10 years. Because
Right?
I spent 10 years having everything thrown at me, from underperforming staff to disasters in the stock ordering to a bomb threat in one of my pubs. It was literally everything that could have happened in 10 years happened to me. And I was like, thank God it did.
Yes.
Because everything I'm now able to deliver as part of qualifications or part of my leadership training or part of my coaching and mentoring, any sort of guidance that I give people is all based off that experience. And of course, there was more after that. But that was definitely the period where it was like, okay, get it all in now. And the most grateful thing I have about that time, I think, is that, to go back to the point earlier about energy management, in my 20s, I had the energy to manage all of that. So the fact that it happened in that 10-year span was actually perfect timing.
And I think there's too many elements in the leadership world where people talk about they'll get an Olympian on a stage, which can be brilliant, by the way, because I've seen some great people, and you sit and listen and go, wow, they won that gold medal, or the top sports star, and you think, oh my goodness, they won this, they did that. But actually within that, a lot of people aren't getting some of the nuggets around, this is how I dealt with a difficult time. And actually, I think there'll be a lot of people in audiences going, well, I don't want a gold medal, and I don't want to win a sports trophy, and I definitely don't want to climb that mountain. I was like, far too much hard work, but I quite like something that would help me with what I'm going through at the moment. And I think there's so much learning that comes from people challenges and difficult moments, and there's not enough shared on that in the world. I think it's better. And again, taking Zoe's point, we don't want to go too far into it's not a therapy session for when people are doing that. But I think sharing the learning, that's the key bit that I think can really help everybody. That's the bit people can connect with, and that's the bit people can take away and use to their advantage.
I agree, Drew. I do want to balance this again. I'm going to challenge some of this as well. Not challenging, but what I think needs to happen when you fail or when you win, or whether you're successful or you're going through a struggle, I think you need to find a consistency in the way that you analyze all of that. I really do. And I think that's the key to it. Yes, take the lessons from the losses. And listen, every one of us love to hear about, for mine, it's 15 losses straight. Oh, geez, that must have been a miserable time. You must have learned a whole lot of stuff about yourself. Yes. But I also learned some really horrible stuff about myself when I've had success too.
Yes.
And so analyze in the same way. If you win that game you talked about earlier, Drew, about 6-0, and so you go to the pub and celebrate, but you don't analyze it in the same way as you would when you lost 6-0, well, you're not doing your company or your team or yourself any favors.
Yeah.
It needs to be analyzed in the same way. So take the lessons from the success as well, and learn to deal with success in a way that you're not jumping over the moon every time you win. You're keeping it level, and you're not going to have these huge emotional roller coaster of everything's shit, don't go well, then the whole world caves in. And equally, when you have success, that everything isn't just all fine. Everything wasn't perfect on that day.
Yeah.
Analyze it in the same way. Take the lessons out of it in the same way at both ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because as the saying goes, it's used in sport a lot. You're never as good as they say you are when you're winning, and you're never as bad as they say you are when you're losing.
Sure.
You can win a game by complete luck, right? It could be a referee decision, it could be the weather, it could be anything.
Don't blame the refs, Drew. Don't blame the refs.
No, I won't go there. We've been there before. But I also think you can lose a game by just being unlucky as well. And Tony's right, the analysis, and that's what Francois Pienaar's point was. He was saying you've got to analyse the wins as much as the difficult moments. The key bit here is, and I'll keep saying this word, but it was Zoe's fault because she said it first, being curious, right? Curiosity is the hidden gem in pretty much anything to do with leadership. It's the one bit we've got to keep going back to. Get curious. What happened? Get rid of as much bias as you can. The human brain is biased, so that's going to be a difficult thing. But as much bias as you can. Let's look at this. Let's analyze this. Let's look at it with it as clean a set of lenses as we can and take the learning out of it.
Going back to what you said earlier about like Olympians sharing the whole story, I think that was why I was actually really grateful for having Alice Deering on the podcast a few months ago, because she shared her whole journey of swimming and everything that had happened for her. Just after she became open water junior world champion, she then lost all of her funding, got kicked out of the national centre. She had to go into the university team. She was all like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And she said now, like, obviously she understands what she needed, although none of it was her decision. What she needed was that shift into a culture that actually allowed her to embrace change and make change for herself when she needed it. Now, obviously, she competes in a very solo sport. It's just you, or you're part of 2 or 3 people that are swimming on the same team, but it's still ultimately only one of you gets the gold medal. But she spoke very much about that sort of shift in culture that she experienced when she went inside Loughborough University teams as opposed to what it was like at the National Centre. She said neither of them are no better or worse than each other. It's just that the National Centre wasn't right for me. So actually going into the university culture where she was able to make those flexes and adaptations and that exploration and that staying curious about what was happening for her in the moment allowed her to train at her own pace, allowed her to flex her swimming style to make herself better and perform higher. And that's what ultimately got her onto the Tokyo Olympics team. So she seemed to share a lot of that. And a big part of that journey was there were points I hated swimming. There were points I did not want to go to training. There were points I did not want to make any change whatsoever. And she was very open and honest about that. And I actually thought that was a really positive conversation to have because it was the whole picture and it was lessons learned from both success and failure, as you said.
What I would add to that as well is just as you described that, that's one individual working through the change. So when you've then got a team, you've got a team of 10 individuals who are all going through that in their own ways. Nobody hits the same point at the same time. So you can have one person who's at a high point of, this is going to be great. And the person sitting next to them is the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And the challenge for leaders is you are going through your own journey of that change at the same time. And you might be in one position, but as a leader, when you stand in front of your team, there is an expectation for you to communicate in a certain way, regardless of where you're at with it all and what your thoughts on and your opinions are and how you think it's all going to go. And I would love to see more coaches speak on stages because the coaches, people that have led the teams through that adversity, because it's great to hear the individual's story. I think when we hear coaches like Tony sharing that story, we're not just hearing about Tony's own journey, we're hearing how he's led through that and how he's supported and guided and led the 10, 12, 15, if not more individuals that are also trying to come through that change as well. And I think moving yourself through change, self-leadership is very important. And it's a great story to hear. And there will always be lessons to take from that. Hearing how somebody has led a team through that change and self-leadership of their own thoughts on that change experience, as well as how they've managed to get everybody with them and out the other side, that's just got so much more breadth and depth to the lessons learned. So I think that's the takeaway for me in hearing these is that actually remembering that leaders are not just trying to get their team through it, they're also trying to get themselves through it as well. And that's quite often can be two very different emotive states as to where they are in that change process.
What has been your guys' biggest personal learning when it comes to change? What's the one thing that you would tell every other leader if you could?
Can I have two?
Yeah.
I've said this several times, but I'll say it another time. I had a great story about kids in school. The thing I'd say is embrace your inner child with this kind of stuff. And the story is, there's a guy teaching a lesson in a primary school, and he's going round, and this kid's doing this picture, and he goes, "What are you drawing?" He said, "I'm drawing a blue duck." And he's like, "That's great." Then he talks to another kid, and he goes, "What are you drawing?" He said, "I'm drawing God." And the teacher goes, "But no one knows what God looks like." And the kid just goes, "You will in a minute." And I just think it's a brilliant story because, like, there's no limits put on that, okay? People get really curious and they can ask lots of questions. And I think that as we get older, we probably assume too much, where I think getting curious about things and understanding, we're too quick to label things, right? That kid's got that issue or that's that. or in the business world, we think they're going to be difficult with that change. And then we just assume and we look for signs because it's confirmation bias. We're going to see it. Just get curious about things, get curious about yourself and your self-leadership. As Zoe was just talking about, get curious. And the other one I'd want to say is another C, because I'll do like a bit of alliteration, which is about be courageous. Let's go and do stuff. Don't play it safe, because there's one thing, there's a brilliant article by Bronnie Ware a few years ago as a palliative care nurse, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. Don't be on that deathbed regretting stuff. Go for it, push it, try it. What's the worst that can happen? Go for it, and don't limit yourself. And I'm not talking about being crazy, right? And making stupid decisions and risking things and putting other people at risk. But I think that humans are at the best when they really go for it and they have courage, which is that leap of faith. Yes, it is. Go for it. But it's also being able to stay the course. Don't drop off. Be courageous. Take the leap of faith. Stay the course. Keep going. They will be my 2 bits that I'd say are the nuggets for me.
Just change the word to opportunity. Full stop.
Oh,
That's it.
brilliant. Short, sharp, and to the point.
Love that.
Just reshape it. Yeah.
Amazing.
So I would pick up on that. So there's a great, I don't know where the saying comes from, but somebody who I co-train with a fair bit uses it. And that's that mindset is everything and opportunities are everywhere. So it's certainly the conversations that I have with people going into a period of change or leading a team through a period of change is that inner confidence, it'll be all right. Like, it will be all right. And probably in a year's time, this will be the norm and we will have completely forgotten about whatever we've bounced around and whatever pain we've gone through to get here. And I think sometimes we just need to sit and remind ourselves, like, we're resilient, capable, confident, courageous people. We've got a good team around us. We'll be all right. I think sometimes it's that just we can worry about all of the things that could go wrong, but actually a lot of it's going to go right too. And it'll be all right. You'll be all right.
Love that. Amazing pieces of advice. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate you sharing those. If anybody wants to connect with any of you guys, like, where's the first place they can find you? Zoe?
LinkedIn, probably the best place, I think, for most people listening to this, or their website is zoethompson.uk. I think LinkedIn is where I'm most active.
LinkedIn to me, most definitely.
Amazing. And Drew?
Oh, I'm all over the place. I'm like a germ. You can't get rid of me, Laura. LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I like a bit of TikTok. And yeah, website, drewpovey.co.uk.
Amazing. Well, I'll put the links to all 3 of your LinkedIn accounts on the description for this episode. So if you want to get in contact with any of the guests I've had today, please just click on those links and you'll find them. I always get excited when I do episodes with guests, but I'm not afraid to admit I was outright giddy just before we started this one. This first roundtable has been absolutely amazing. I want to thank you all for coming on today and contributing to this important topic. I know there are so many leaders out there with changes both big and small they want to make. And I hope what we've shared today goes a long way to supporting them to making that transition in a more peaceful and authentic way. I hope this has been as great for you guys as it has been for me.
Loved it. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, it's been great.
Amazing. Good. I will definitely be doing more of these. So keep tuning in, people, because I will be doing some more. Thank you so much for coming on, everyone. It's been an insightful and empowering conversation and a brilliant first roundtable. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Until next time, everyone.